Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you connect with those big ideas, those insights that really make things click, without you having to sift through mountains of text.
That's the goal. Quick, deep understanding.
And today, we're actually wrapping up our journey through Chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. We've looked at Sankhya Yoga, the wisdom part,
The knowledge.
and Karma Yoga, the action part.
Right, the path of action.
So now, we focus on where it all comes together.
Mm-hmm.
The description of the wise person, the Sthitha-prajna.
Exactly. It's verses 54 to 72. This section gives us this portrait of someone who has really internalized all that wisdom we've been discussing.
Like seeing the theory in practice.
Precisely. A living example.
And for you listening, especially if you want to grasp these ideas efficiently, understanding the Sthitha-prajna offers, well, a kind of model, doesn't it?
It really does. It's less abstract philosophy and more a practical vision for living with clarity, with inner balance.
Okay, so in this deep dive, we're going to tackle 3 main questions based on these verses.
Yeah, the big ones.
First, who is this Sthitha-prajna, this person of steady wisdom?
Second, what are their key characteristics? How would we recognize them or aspects of them?
And third, maybe the most practical question, how does one actually cultivate this kind of wisdom?
How do you get there?
And we're drawing on some great sources here. Swami Dayananda's Gita Home Study, the classic commentaries of Sri Sankara, and other related teachings, especially from the Arsha Vidya tradition.
A really rich lineage of thought. Our aim is to synthesize it, make it clear, and hopefully quite illuminating for you.
Right. Let's dive in then. First question. Who is this Sthitha-prajna? What's the fundamental definition?
Well, it starts with Arjuna's own question in verse 54. He asks Krishna, hey, what's the description of someone whose understanding is steady, who's fully established in the self?
And the term itself, Sthitha-prajna.
Exactly. It tells you a lot. Sthita means steady, firm, established, and prajna is wisdom, understanding, intellect.
So someone whose wisdom is firm, rock solid.
Rock solid, yes. Their intellect, their ability to discern, it's unwavering. And crucially, it's rooted.
Rooted in. This goes back to the earlier stuff in the chapter, doesn't it? About the self.
Absolutely. Remember those verses like 2.2c or 2.25? They talk about the self being eternal, unchanging, indestructible. That's the foundation.
Okay.
The Sthitha-prajna's wisdom isn't based on, the ups and downs of life, the fleeting things. It's anchored in understanding that core, unchanging reality within.
Which is totally different from someone caught up in the world.
Completely different. Verse 2.45 mentions those driven by the gunasattva, rajas, tamas, the qualities of nature. Their understanding is constantly shifting, pulled this way and that. It lacks that deep, stable root.
Right. So the foundation is this unwavering grasp of the true self.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, let's move to the second question. What are the signs, the characteristics? Verse 55 kicks this off.
It does. Verse 55 says, essentially, when someone completely casts off all the desires that arise from the mind and is satisfied in the self, by the self, then they're called a Sthitha-prajna.
Casts off desires. But that sounds like suppression. Is it just forcing desires down?
That's a great question. No, it's deeper than just suppression. It's about letting go of the very root of craving, the stuff that comes from feeling incomplete.
So if you're already content within, satisfied by the self.
Exactly. Then the need to constantly seek fulfillment from external things, from achieving this or getting that, it naturally diminishes. The pull isn't as strong.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it connects back to what you mentioned about being free from the gunas and the pairs of opposites, like pleasure, pain, success, failure, that nistragunya and nerdvanva.
Precisely. When your main source of okayness, your satisfaction, comes from that fundamental awareness of I am, as Swami Vidyatmananda puts it, that self-revealing consciousness, then external validation just doesn't have the same hook. True contentment comes from inside.
Okay. Then verse 56 talks about equanimity, being undisturbed by pleasure and pain. Wow. That sounds extremely difficult.
It's definitely a high ideal. The verse describes the wise person's mind as being, unperturbed. Whether good things happen or bad things happen.
They just stay balanced.
They maintain an inner balance, yes. The key is non-attachment to outcomes. Verse 5.12 points out that attachment to results leads to bondage. If you're not attached, you're not thrown off balance by gain or loss.
So life brings its mix, the joys and sorrows.
Always does.
But the wise person isn't swept away. They kind of observe it with detachment.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
They observe, they experience, but they don't let it define their inner state. Swami Vidyatmananda really highlights this life is duality. The wisdom is in how you relate to it.
Okay. And verses 57 to 59 take this detachment idea further, relating it specifically to sense objects.
Right. This is about withdrawing the senses. The famous analogy comes up here.
The tortoise pulling its limbs into its shell.
Exactly like that. The Sthitha-prajna can pull their senses back from the world of objects, but verse 59 adds a really crucial nuance.
Yeah.
It says, even if you physically abstain, say, you stop eating sweets, the taste for them, the subtle craving, the mental habit.
The rasa.
Yes, the rasa. That might still linger. And that only truly ceases, the verse says, when you realize the supreme, the ultimate reality.
So just stopping the action isn't enough. The underlying desire, the memory trace, needs to dissolve too.
It's a much deeper detachment from the longing itself. Otherwise, as verse 60 warns.
Right, the warning. The senses are powerful.
Extremely powerful. Verse 60 says they can violently carry away the mind, even of someone who's intelligent and trying hard to control them.
So just knowing better isn't always enough protection.
Apparently not. It shows you need more than just intellectual effort. You need that constant vigilance, that deeper connection, which leads to the solution in verse 61.
Which is?
Restraining the senses and focusing the mind steadfastly on the divine, on the self. It connects back to that idea of yoga as equanimity, that mental poise we saw earlier.
Okay, so sense control, mind control, focus on the self. That's the practice.
That's the core practice.
And then verses 62 and 63 paint this pretty stark picture of what happens when that control isn't there. It's like a chain reaction.
It really is a downward spiral. The verses lay it out step by step, thinking about sense objects.
Leads to attachment.
Right. Attachment leads to desire, wanting it.
And if you don't get what you desire?
Anger flares up. Desire thwarted becomes anger.
Okay.
Anger leads to delusion. You lose perspective. Delusion causes loss of memory, forgetting your true nature, forgetting what's important.
And loss of memory leads to?
Destruction of the intellect, your ability to discern. And from there, the verse says, you perish, you're lost.
Wow. That's quite the sequence, from just thinking about an object to complete ruin.
It shows how critical managing that initial interaction with the world is. It's the antithesis of the Sthitha-prajna state.
So how do you break that cycle? Verses 64 and 65 give the positive path.
Exactly. They describe the person who interacts with the world using their senses, but the senses are under control. And crucially, they are free from attachment and aversion, liking and disliking.
Moving through the world without those strong pulls.
That person, the verse says, attains tranquility, prasada, clarity, grace. Peace isn't found out there.
It's an inner state cultivated by freeing yourself from those reactions.
Precisely. And verse 66 hammers this home. Without that self-control, without that wisdom, there's no stable intellect, no capacity for deep contemplation.
And therefore?
No peace.
Yeah.
And without peace, how can there be happiness?
Makes sense. Then verse 67 uses that really vivid analogy, the wind in the boat.
Yeah, I like that one too. It says that even one of the senses, if it's allowed to roam freely and the mind follows it, it can carry away the person's understanding, just like the wind blowing a ship off course on the water.
So even a single weak link, a single uncontrolled sense, can derail everything.
It underscores the need for, comprehensive control and constant awareness, which leads right back to verse 68, reaffirming the main point. The one whose senses are all completely withdrawn from their objects.
Their wisdom is steady.
Their wisdom is steady. Sthitha-prajna pratisthita.
Now, verse 69 gets a bit paradoxical about night and day for the wise versus the unwise.
It is. It's a fascinating perspective shift. It says, what is night for all beings, meaning the reality of the self, the inner world, which most people are asleep to.
Okay.
That's day for the self-controlled sage. They're awake to that reality.
Conversely.
What is day for most beings? The constant hustle and bustle, chasing sensory pleasures, worldly success, the things people are usually awake and striving for. That's night for the sage who sees through it, who sees its transient, ultimately hollow nature. Their whole value system is inverted, oriented towards the eternal.
A fundamental difference in what they consider real and important.
Totally. Then comes another beautiful analogy in verse 70.
The ocean.
The ocean, yeah. The wise person is compared to the ocean, which remains full and undisturbed, even though rivers are constantly flowing into it.
So desires might still enter the mind.
They might arise, thoughts might come, sensory inputs happen, the rivers flow in, but they don't agitate the ocean-like fullness and stillness of the wise person's mind. They're absorbed without causing disturbance. unlike the person who chases desires.
That's a powerful image of inner stability.
Very. And then verses 71 and 72 provide the grand conclusion to this description.
Finishing the portrait.
Verse 71 describes the person who lives free from longing, having abandoned all desires, and without the sense of I-ness and my-ness, without ego. That person attains peace, Shanti.
Freedom from desire, freedom from ego, leading to peace.
And finally, verse 72 declares, this is the Brahmic state, being established in Brahman, the ultimate reality. Attaining this, one is never again deluded.
Never deluded.
And remaining in this state even at the time of death, one attains Brahma Nirvana, absolute liberation, oneness with that reality.
It's quite a state to aspire to. Which brings us perfectly to our final question, how? How does one actually become wise like this? It feels like a huge leap.
It does seem like a huge leap, but the path is actually woven throughout the description itself. It's not instant, it's a process.
The gradual cultivation.
Exactly. Cultivating detachment, letting go of the grip of objects and outcomes, diligently working on controlling the senses and quieting the mind's chatter, consistently turning the awareness inward, fixing the mind on the self, and consciously practicing that equanimity, that balance day in and day out.
And didn't we talk earlier about karma yoga playing a role?
Absolutely crucial. Selfless action, karma yoga, purifies the mind. It cleans the mirror, so to speak, removing the selfishness and attachments that obscure our inherent wisdom. Many commentaries stress this purification aspect.
So action prepares the ground. What about knowledge?
Knowledge is key. It's the jnana, the understanding of the self and reality, that ultimately liberates. We saw that in verses like 2.49 and 4.36. It's not just book learning, though. It's a lived realization. And verse 4.34 tells us how to get it. Approach those who have realized the truth. Inquire sincerely, serve them with reverence. Learn from a qualified teacher. Swami Paramarthananda often emphasizes this.
So seeking guidance is important.
Very. And then steadfastness in that knowledge, as verse 5.1 suggests, is what leads to that lasting peace.
And Swami Vidya had that point about being a yogi. Which is just about wrestling with the mind.
Right. He pointed out that true yoga, true abidance, is recognizing that the self is already free, inherently actionless, always distinct from thoughts. It's not so much about stopping thoughts by force, but shifting your identification.
Identifying as the witness.
Yes. Seeing yourself as the awareness that witnesses the body's actions and the mind's activities without getting entangled. That shift is profoundly liberating.
So it's really a combination. Purify through action, seek and internalize knowledge, shift your self-identification.
It's a holistic path. Action, knowledge, meditation, devotion, they all work together. It's an ongoing journey of discovery guided by these teachings.
Okay, so let's try to boil this down. What are the absolute core takeaways about this Sthitha-prajna, this wise person?
Well, I'd say 1, freedom from the constant nagging of desires. 2, a deep, unshakable equanimity, staying balanced through thick and thin. 3, a healthy detachment from things, outcomes, even sensory experiences. 4, mastery over the senses and the restless mind. And 5, the result of all that, finding real, lasting peace and contentment within the self, not needing it from the outside world.
And the hopeful part?
The hopeful part is that this isn't some mythical state reserved for a chosen few. It's presented as a potential within us, something that can be cultivated through effort, through understanding, through aspiration.
So as you're listening, maybe reflect on these qualities. You might see areas where you already feel some stability, or maybe areas where, you feel more challenged and could perhaps cultivate a bit more of this steadiness. What part of this description stood out most to you?
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Chapter 2 of the Gita, a really foundational chapter.
Absolutely, packed with insights.
In our next session, we'll move forward and begin exploring Chapter 3, which delves deeper into karma yoga, the path of action.
Looking forward to that. But before we wrap up, a final thought for you to ponder. How might your daily life, your experience of challenges, fundamentally change if you were to embody even just a few of these characteristics of the Sthitha-prajna? Think about the practical difference that kind of inner wisdom could make in your own search for a more fulfilling life.
Something to chew on.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.